I hope you're having a wonderful day today and a wonderful start to your week. Okay, sound check, and then let's go ahead and get going. Okay, test, check. Okay, test, check. Wonderful. It's working great. So welcome in, everybody. This is Jay Baldell, and we are about ready to get into some more Transcendental Magic by Éliphas Lévi. So I sure do hope you're all having a marvelous start to your week. Been a little overcast here, a little bit rainy, but that's always a nice treat, especially it's springtime, so you gotta get them waters on the earth. All right, music and chat. Oh goodness. Sometimes this thing really likes to give me some grief. Well, more I do it to myself, really. I accidentally drag things around, and so we'll get it done. No big deal at all. Hey, what's up, girl? How you feeling today, huh? Welcome in, everybody just coming in. Just getting those final starting things all squared away, and then we'll get into it. Today's going to be a fun one. Today, Éliphas Lévi is going to tell us about witchcraft, and he certainly got some things to say about that. I would hope so if he's going to write a chapter on it. Okay, there we go. Looking good, feeling better. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Or happy whenever and wherever you might happen across this. All right, well, let's go ahead and pull from the tarot like we love to do when we're starting out. And see what it's got to say for us. Took yesterday off, but needed a little extra rest, and that's fine. Sometimes you got to allow that rest in your life. If you work yourself to the bone, as they say, if you're a hard worker and you sometimes feel spread a little thin, it is perfect to find a rest. Even if, like me, you're an American and you're kind of programmed to just go, 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 go. Seems people are getting a little better at that. Oh, nice. I just saw a card we're going to need to pull out in a little bit anyway. Waiting at the bottom of the deck. But we'll do our traditional pull because we might get that one anyway. All right, we'll cut it, and it's this card right here. Nope, this card's Earth. This card is Earth. It's Pentacles. Let's see. How'd I do? Oh, well, I was right that it's Earth in the sense that it's Virgo, the Hermit card. All right, then. We're seeing him again. Wonderful. And with that three-headed dog of Cerberus, and also kind of the idea that this particular hermit is either working his way through a field or maybe even a maze. We've talked about that when we've pulled him before. But based on what this upcoming chapter today is going to be discussing, this card is actually probably one of the perfect cards. I could think of maybe a couple others that would be just as good, but this one for sure is going to be so very good and grand with his lantern there. Hopefully some of you have looked a little more into that symbolism in your free time. Or that Hebrew letter of Yod, hand, but also Yod being the flame, in the sense that, at least I've heard it put that way at least a few different times from a few different people, that Yod is because Sheen is fire, for those of you who don't know, or at least that's the way we interpret it when we put it up kabbalistically and all that. And so but Yod kind of more the flame, because the whole Hebrew alphabet, if you look at it, has all those Yods in it. And so it's kind of the flame that sparks the entire alphabet. But in terms of this chapter and seeing that three-headed dog of Cerberus, the dog that guards the underworld, without a doubt, the imagery of this card and the path working that could be done with this card could certainly be, I think, how do I want to say, crucial, instrumental even, in navigating the scary realms of black magic and witchcraft. And so speaking of which, today, chapter 16, so here is the Tower card, the card that would go along with this chapter today. And Mary Galloway, welcome in, says, you good, can you shout out Hugo? Yep, definitely. Shout out Hugo. And thank you for your like and subscription. I appreciate that a lot. It helps the channel. Be sure to hit a like and a subscription if you haven't yet. Hit that notification bell for some more content. Okay, so, but with bewitchments and what Lévi has to say about bewitchments, the Tower card is pretty fitting. He has an interesting take on the Tower card, though, that he talks about in here a little bit. And then I know he's got more to discuss about tarot as we go along. And Dean Master maybe, says there is no such thing as magic. Well, there's no such thing as Dean Master either. And Mary Galloway says, when you shouted me out, I smiled under the screen. Well, shout out to you again, and good. I'm glad that I could help brighten your day a bit. The Tower card also going along with the astrological sign of Mars. So destruction, but through destruction, leaving the space for creation or rebuilding, because the kind of the idea with this tower is that it's in like this constant state of being destroyed and rebuild. Dean Master, it is German. That was my guess. Says means your Lord. Well, part of it's German. Means your Lord. That's sick. Amen. Okay. Well, and you might be right. Maybe there is no such thing as magic, but again, there is no such thing as Dean Master or Mary Galloway or anybody else who's chilling out right now watching the stream. At least, I don't know, if you ask some people, it's all just an illusion. Every little bit, there is no such thing as the tarot. There is no such thing as this delicious, crispy beverage I got right here to sip on. Sure tastes real, though, but we are in that dense matter. Anyway, the Tower card here, we pulled him before, but since we're taking another look at it along with this chapter, it's pretty cool. That Eye of Shiva. So I certainly see a correspondence between these two cards. And not only these themes of creation, like you see the hermit has his eye on the Orphic egg, the snake wrapped around the egg, and also the I don't know. It depends on who you ask if this is supposed to be a staff or wand, but it kind of looks like a sperm. And then the destruction of the Tower card, but that eye in the top, the eye of Shiva opening up, the eye of Ra, perhaps, even though it looks a little different than the way we usually see that depicted, but in the symbolic way. But then also the Hermit's Lantern right there. So, as I said, the Hermit seems to be a great card for how we would navigate these themes in this chapter, which are also going to be connected with this Tower card here. And just life in general. Maybe you feel bewitched, but maybe you've just done it to yourself, as opposed to maybe you actually upset somebody who really does participate in witchcraft and magic. But let's go ahead and get into it now. And great to see you, Mary Galloway. Thanks for stopping by, and you have a good day as well. And our Lord is God, and we do love God, don't we? Him, her, they, them. God's a lot of things. All right. So chapter 16, Oyen, but he has the English letter Q. In fact, speaking of this drink, I might need to move it. Might need to move it a little bit out of the way. Might need to shift this a little bit. That's looking good. Okay. And he has a note saying 16 is the number of the temple. So that tower in the tarot card is also known as the house of God a lot of the times, or the house of divinity. All right, bewitchments, fons, oculus, fulgur. When a man gazes unchastely upon any woman, he profanes that woman, said the great master. What is willed with persistence is done. Every real will is confirmed by acts. Every will confirmed by an act is an action. Every action is subject to a judgment, and such judgment is eternal. These are dogmas and principles from which it follows that the good or evil which we will to others as to ourselves, according to the capacity of our will and within the sphere of our operation, must take place infallibly. If the will be confirmed and the determination fixed by acts, such acts should be analogous to the will. The intent to do harm or to excite love in order to be efficacious must be confirmed by deeds of hatred or affection. Whatsoever bears the impression of a human soul belongs to that soul. Whatsoever a man has has appropriated after any manner becomes his body in the broader acceptation of the term. And anything which is done to the body of a man is felt immediately or immediately by his soul. It is for this reason that every hostile deed committed against one's neighbor is regarded in moral theology as the beginning of homicide. Bewitchment is a homicide, and the more infamous because it eludes self-defense by the victim and punishment by law. This principle being established to exonerate our conscience, and for the warning of weak vessels, let us affirm boldly that bewitchment is possible. Let us even go further and lay down that it is not only possible, but in some sense necessary and fatal. It is going on continually in the social world, unconsciously both to agents and patients. Involuntary bewitchment is one of the most terrible dangers of human life. Passional sympathy inevitably subjects the most ardent desire to the strongest will. Moral maladies are more contagious than physical, and there are some triumphs of infatuation and fashion which are comparable to leprosy or cholera. We may die of an evil acquaintance as well as of a contagious touch, and the frightful plague which during recent centuries only has avenged in Europe the profanation of the mysteries of love is a revelation of the analogical laws of nature, and at the same time offers only a feeble image of the moral corruptions which follow daily on an equivocal sympathy. There is a story of a jealous and infamous man who, to avenge himself on a rival, contracted an incurable disorder and made it the common scourge and anathema of a divided bed. This atrocious history is that of every magician, or rather of every sorcerer who practices bewitchments. He poisons himself in order that he may poison others. He damns himself that he may torture others. He draws in hell with his breath in order that he may expel it by his lungs. He wounds himself mortally that he may inflict death on others. But possessed of this unhappy courage, it is positive and certain that he will poison and slay by the mere projection of his perverse will. There are some forms of love which are as deadly as hatred, and the bewitchments of goodwill are the torment of the wicked. The prayers offered to God for the conversion of a man bring misfortune to that man if he will not repent. As we have said, it is weariness and danger to strive against the fluidic currents stirred up by chains of wills in union. Hence, there are two kinds of bewitchment, voluntary and involuntary. Physical and moral bewitchment may be distinguished in like manner. Power attracts power, life attracts life, health attracts health. This is a law of nature. If two children live, above all, if they sleep together, and if one be weak while the other is strong, the strong will absorb the weak, and the latter will waste away. For this reason, it is important that children should sleep always alone. In conventional seminaries, certain pupils absorb the intelligence of the others, and in every given circle of men, one individual emerges who avails himself of the wills of the rest. Bewitchment by means of currents is exceedingly common, as we have observed already. Morally as well as physically, most of us are carried away by the crowd. What, however, we have proposed to exhibit more especially in this chapter is the almost absolute power of the human will upon the determination of its acts and the influence of every outward demonstration of will upon outward things. Voluntary bewitchments are still frequent in our rural places because natural forces among ignorant and isolated persons operate unreduced by any doubt or any diversion. A frank, absolute hatred, unleavened by by rejected passion or personal cupidity, is under certain given conditions a death sentence for its object. I say unmixed with amorous passion or cupidity because a desire, being an attraction, counterbalances and annuls the power of projection. For example, a jealous person will never efficaciously bewitch his rival, and a greedy heir will never, by the mere fact of his will, succeed in shortening the days of a miserly and long lived uncle. Bewitchments attempted under such conditions reflect upon the operator and help rather than hurt their object, setting him free from a hostile action which destroys itself by unmeasured exaggeration. The term involtement, bewitchment, so strong in its Gaelic simplicity, expresses admirably what it means: the act of enveloping someone, so to speak, in a formulated will. The instrument of bewitchments is the great magical agent which, under the influence of an evil will, becomes really and positively the demon. Witchcraft, properly so called, that is, ceremonial operation with intent to bewitch, acts only on the operator and serves to fix and confirm his will by formulating it with persistence and travail, the two conditions which make volition efficacious. The more difficult or horrible the operation, the greater is its power, because it acts more strongly on the imagination and confirms effort in direct ratio of resistance. This explains the bizarre nature and even atrocious character in the operations in black magic, as practiced by the ancients in the Middle Ages, the diabolical masses, administration of sacraments to reptiles, effusions of blood, human sacrifices, and other monstrosities, which are the very essence and reality of Goetia or black magic. Such are the practices which from all time have brought down upon sorcerers the just repression of the laws. Black magic is really only a graduated combination of sacrileges and murders designed for the permanent perversion of a human will and for the realization in a living man of the hideous phantom of the demon. It is therefore, properly speaking, the religion of the devil, the cultus of darkness, hatred of good carried to the height of paroxysm. It is the incarnation of death and the persistent creation of hell. The Kabbalist Bodin, who has been considered erroneously of a feeble and superstitious mind, had no other motive in writing his demonomania than that of warning people against dangerous incredulity. And there's a note that says Jean Bodin, lawyer and demonographer, died of the plague in 1596, and it is uncertain to this day how he should be regarded. While his printed work, entitled The Demonomania of Sorcerers, would have done honor to the credulity of Del Rio and almost surpassed Torquemada in ferocity and fanaticism, He left behind him a volume in manuscript which exercised his admirers, and he who recommended savage tortures and lingering death not only to those who practiced sorcery, but to those who showed pity for sorcerers, might himself have perished by the clemency of the Holy Inquisition. The manuscript, which does not seem to have been printed, is entitled A Septenary Colloquy Concerning the Hidden Secrets of Sublime Things. It is a controversial discourse between persons of various religions. This exponent of Christianity being worsted frequently by heathens. Whatever his real views, there is no doubt that Bodine helped materially in the diffusion of a sanguinary superstition. It is to be hoped that he did so honestly, but in any case, the profound subtlety attributed to him by Éliphas Lévi is too much in advance of the time to be taken quite seriously. Okay. Initiated by the study of the Kabbalah into the true secrets of magic, he trembled at the danger to which society was exposed by the abandonment of this power to the wickedness of men. Hence he attempted what at the present time Monsieur Eudes de Merville is attempting amongst ourselves. He gathered facts without interpreting them, and affirmed in the face of inattentive or preoccupied science the existence of the occult influences and criminal operations of evil magic. In his own day, Bodine attracted no more attention than will be given to Monsieur Eudes de Merville, because it is not enough to enumerate phenomena and to prejudge their cause if we would influence serious people. We must study, explain, and demonstrate such cause, and this is precisely what we are ourselves attempting. Will better success crown our own efforts? It is possible to die through the love of certain people, even as by their hate. There are absorbing passions, under the breath of which we feel ourselves depleted like the spouses of vampires. Not only do the wicked torment the good, but unconsciously the good torture the wicked. The gentleness of Abel was a long and painful bewitchment for the ferocity of Cain. Among evil men, the hatred of good originates in the very instinct of self preservation. Moreover, they deny that what torments them is good and are driven to deify and justify evil for their own peace. In the sight of Cain, Abel was a hypocrite and coward who abused the pride of humanity by his scandalous submissions to divinity. How much must this first murderer have endured before making such a frightful attack upon his brother? Had Abel understood, he would have been afraid. Antipathy is the presentiment of a possible bewitchment, either of love or hatred, for we find love frequently succeeding repulsion. The astral light warns us of coming influences by its action on the more or less sensible, more or less active nervous system. Instantaneous sympathies, electric loves are explosions of the astral light, which are as exactly and mathematically demonstrable as the discharge of strong magnetic batteries. Thereby, we may see what unexpected dangers threaten an uninitiated person who is perpetually fooling with fire in the neighborhood of unseen powder magazines. We are saturated with the astral light, and we project it unceasingly to make room for and to attract fresh supplies. The nervous instruments, which are specially designed either for attraction or projection, are the eyes and hands. The polarity of the hand is resident in the thumb, and hence, according to the magical tradition which still lingers in rural places, whenever anyone is in suspicious company, he should keep the thumb doubled up and hidden in the hand, and while in the main avoiding a fixed glance at anyone, still being the first to look at those whom we have reason to fear, so as to escape unexpected fluidic projections and fascinating regards. There are certain animals which have the power of breaking the currents of astral light by an absorption peculiar to themselves. They are violently antipathetic to us and possess a certain sorcery of the eye. The toad, the basilisk, and the tard are instances. These animals, when tamed and carried alive on the person, or kept in one's rooms, are a guarantee against the hallucinations and trickeries of astral intoxication. A term made use of here for the first time, and one which explains all phenomena of unbridled passions, mental exaltations, and folly. Tame toads and tards, my dear sir, the disciple of Voltaire will say to me, carry them about with you, but write no more. To which I may answer that I shall think seriously of so doing if ever I feel tempted to laugh at anything of which I am ignorant, or to treat those whose knowledge and wisdom I fail to understand as fools or as madmen. Paracelsus, the greatest of the Christian magi, opposed bewitchment by the practices of a contrary bewitchment. He devised sympathetic remedies and applied them, not to the suffering members, but to representations of these, formed and consecrated according to magical ceremonial. His successes were incredible, for never has any physician approached Paracelsus in his marvels of healing. But Paracelsus arrived at magnetism long before Mesmer and had carried to its final consequences this luminous discovery, or rather, this initiation into the magic of the ancients, who better than us understood the great magical agent and did not regard the astrolite azoth, the universal magnesia of the pages, as a special animal fluid emanating only from a few secular creatures. In his occult philosophy, Paracelsus opposes ceremonial magic, the terrible power of which he did not certainly ignore, but he sought to decry its practices so as to discredit black magic. He locates the omnipotence of the magus in the interior and occult magnes, and the most skillful magnetizers of our own day could not express themselves better. At the same time, he counseled the employment of magical symbols, talismans above all, in the cure of diseases. In our 18th chapter, we shall have occasion to return to the talismans of Paracelsus, while following Gaffarel upon the great question of occult iconography and numismatics. Bewitchment may be cured also by substitution, when that is possible, and by the rupture or deflection of the astral current. The folk traditions on all these points are admirable and undoubtedly of remote antiquity. They are remnants of the teachings of Druids, who were initiated in the mysteries of Egypt and India by wandering hierophants. Now, it is well known and vulgar. Magic that is a bewitchment, that is, a determined will resolved on doing evil, invariably has its result and cannot draw back without risk of death. The sorcerer who liberates anyone from a charm must have another object for his malevolence, or it is certain that he himself will be smitten and will perish as the victim of his own spells. The astral movement being circular, every azotic or magnetic emission which does not encounter its medium returns with force to its point of departure, thus explaining one of the strangest histories in a sacred book, that of the demons sent into the swine, which thereupon cast themselves into the sea. This act of high initiation was nothing else but the rupture of a magnetic current infected by evil wills. Our name is Legion, for we are many, said the instinctive voice of the possessed sufferer. Possessions by the demon are bewitchments, and such cases are innumerable at the present day. One true goddess, what up? Great to see you. Welcome in. Hope you're having such a nice day. A saintly monk who has devoted himself to the service of the insane Brother Hilarion Tissot has succeeded, after long experience and incessant practice, in curing a number of patients by unconsciously using the magnetism of Paracelsus. He attributes most of his cases either to disorder of the subject's will or to the perverse influence of external wills. He regards all crimes as acts of madness and would treat the wicked as diseased, instead of exasperating and making them incurable under the pretense of punishing them. What space of time must still elapse ere poor Brother Hilarion Tissot shall be, probably Tissot, shall be hailed as a man of genius? And how many serious men, when they read this chapter, will say that Tissot and myself should treat one another according to our common ideas, but should refrain from publishing our theories, if we do not wish to be reckoned as physicians deserving the madhouse? It revolves, notwithstanding, said Galileo, stamping his foot upon the earth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, said the Savior of men. It might be added, ye shall love justice, and justice shall make you whole men. A vice is a poison, even for the body. True virtue is a pledge of longevity. The method of ceremonial bewitchments varies with times and persons. All subtle and domineering people find its secrets and its practice within themselves without even actually calculating about them or reasoning on their sequence. Herein they follow instinctive inspirations of the great agent, which, as we have said, accommodates itself marvelously to our vices and our virtues. It may be generally laid down, however, that we are subjected to the wills of others according to the analogies of our tendencies and, above all, our faults. To pamper the weakness of an individuality is to possess ourselves of that individuality and convert it into an instrument in the order of the same errors or depravities. Now, when two natures whose defects are analogous become subordinated to one another, the result is a sort of substitution of the stronger for the weaker, an actual obsession of one mind by the other. Very often, the weaker may struggle and seek to revolt, but it falls only deeper in servitude. So Louis XIII conspired against Richelieu, and subsequently, so to speak, sought his pardon by abandoning his accomplices. We have all a ruling defect, which is for our soul as the umbilical cord of its birth in sin. And it is by this that the enemy can always lay hold upon us. For some it is vanity, for others idleness, for the majority egotism. Let a wicked and crafty mind avail itself of this means, and we are lost. We may not go mad or turn idiots, but we become positively alienated in all the force of the expression. That is, we are subjected to a foreign suggestion. In such a state, one dreads instinctively everything that might bring us back to reason and will not even listen to representations that are opposed to our obsession. Yeah, we don't. We definitely don't see that going on out and about. Here is one of the most dangerous disorders which can affect the moral nature. The sole remedy for such a bewitchment is to make use of folly itself in order to cure folly, to provide the sufferer with imaginary satisfactions in the opposite order to that wherein he is now lost. Endeavor, for example, to cure an ambitious person by making him desire the glories of heaven. Mystic remedy. Cure one who is dissolute by true love. Natural remedy. Obtain honorable successes for a vain person. Exhibit unselfishness to the avaricious and procure for them legitimate proof by honorable participation in generous enterprises, etc. Acting in this way upon the moral nature, we may succeed in curing a number of physical maladies, for the moral affects the physical in virtue of the magical axiom, that which is above is like unto that which is below. That is why the Master said, when speaking of the paralyzed woman, Satan has bound her. A disease invariably originates in a deficiency or an excess, and ever at the root of a physical evil we shall find a moral disorder. This is an unchanging law of nature. All right. All right. So that will be our doctrine on bewitchments. So let's flip on back to the ritual. Okay. Chapter 16 of Ritual, Witchcraft and Spells. What sorcerers and necromancers sought above all in their evocations of the impure spirit was that magnetic power which is the possession of the true adept, but was desired by them only that they might abuse it shamefully. The folly of sorcerers was an evil folly, and one of their chief ends was the power of bewitchments or harmful influences. We have set down in our doctrine what we think upon the subject of bewitchment and how it seems to us as a dangerous and real power. The true magus bewitches without ceremonial and by his mere reprobation those whom he condemns and considers it necessary to punish. His forgiveness even bewitches those who do him wrong, and never do the enemies of initiates carry far the impunity of their injustice. We ourselves have witnessed numerous examples of this fatal law. The murderers of martyrs always perish miserably, and the adepts are martyrs of intelligence. Providence seems to scorn those who despise them and to slay those who would deprive them of life. The legend of the wandering Jew is a popular poetry of this arcanum. A wise man was driven by a nation to his doom. It bade him go on when he sought to rest for a moment. What is the consequence? A similar condemnation overtakes the nation itself. It is proscribed boldly. Men have cried to it, get on, for centuries, and it has found no pity and no repose. A man of learning had a wife whom he loved wildly and passionately in the exaltation of his tenderness. He honored her with blind confidence and trusted her entirely. Vain of her beauty and understanding, this woman became jealous of her husband's superiority and began to hate him. Some time after she deserted him, disgracing herself with an old, ugly, stupid, and immoral man. This was the beginning of her punishment, but it did not end there. The man of learning pronounced solemnly the following sentence upon her: I take back your understanding and your beauty. A year after, she was no longer recognized by those who had known her. She was disfigured by obesity and reflected in her countenance the hideousness of her new affections. Later, she was ugly. 7 years later, she was deranged. This happened in our own time, and we were acquainted with both persons. The Magus condemns after the manner of the skillful physician. For this reason, there is no appeal from his sentence when it has been once pronounced against a guilty person. There are no ceremonies and no invocations. He does but abstain from eating at the same table, or if forced to do so, neither accepts nor offers salt. But the bewitchments of sorcerers are of another kind, and may be compared to an actual poisoning of some current of astral light. They exalt their will by ceremonies till it becomes venomous at distance. But as we have observed in our doctrine, they expose themselves more often to be the first that are killed by their infernal machinery. Let us stigmatize at this point some of their guilty proceedings. They procure hair or garments of the person whom they seek to destroy. They select an animal which seems to them symbolic of the person, and by means of the hair or garments, they place it in magnetic connection with him or her. They give it the same name and then slay it with one blow of the magic knife. They cut open the breast, tear out the heart, wrap it, while still palpitating, in the magnetized objects, and hourly, for the space of 3 days, they drive nails, red hot pins, or long thorns therein, pronouncing malediction upon the name of the bewitched being. They are persuaded, and often rightly, that the victim of their infamous operations experiences as many tortures as if his own heart had been pierced at all points. He begins to waste away and dies after a time of an unknown disease. Another bewitchment made use of by country people consists in consecration of nails to works of hatred by means of the stinking fumigations of Saturn and invocations of evil genii. They follow the footsteps of the person whom it is sought to torment, and drive nails crosswise into every imprint of his feet which can be traced upon the earth or sand. Yet another and more abominable practice. A fat toad is selected, it is baptized, the name and surname of the person to be bewitched is given it, it is made to swallow a consecrated host over which the formulae of execration may have been pronounced. The animal is then wrapped in magnetized objects, bound with the hairs of the victim, upon which the operator has previously spat, and is buried at the threshold of the bewitched person's door, or at some point where he is obliged to pass daily. The elementary spirit of the toad will become a nightmare and a vampire, haunting the dreams of the victim, unless indeed he should know how to drive it back on the operator. Let us pass now to bewitchments by waxen images. The sorcerers of the Middle Ages, eager to place by their sacrileges him who they regarded as their master, mixed baptismal oil and ashes of consecrated hosts with a modicum of wax. Apostate priests were never wanting to deliver them with the treasures of the church. With the accursed wax, they formed an image as far as possible resembling the person whom they desired to bewitch. They clothed his image with garments similar to his. They administered to it the sacraments which he received. They called down upon its head all maledictions which could express the hatred of the sorcerer, inflicting daily imaginary tortures upon it, so as to reach and torment by sympathy the person whom the image represented. This bewitchment is more infallible if the hair, blood, and above all, a tooth of the victim can be procured. It was this which gave rise to the proverbial saying, "You have a tooth against me," meaning you bear a grudge. There is also bewitchment by the glance, called the hettatura or evil eye in Italy. During our civil wars, a shopkeeper had the misfortune to inform against one of his neighbors, who, after a period of detention, was set at liberty, but with his position lost. His sole vengeance was to pass twice daily the shop of the informer, whom he regarded fixedly, saluted, and went on. Some little time after, the shopkeeper, unable to bear the torment of his glance any longer, sold his goods at a loss and changed his neighborhood, leaving no address. In a word, he was ruined. A threat is a real bewitchment because it acts powerfully on the imagination, above all when the latter is open readily to belief in an occult and unlimited power. Right, so a lot of people will say that just telling somebody you've cursed them oftentimes will result in like a curse or even hex like effects, because that person now is getting all caught up in this fear, this threat you've given of performing some type of bewitchment on them, and so then they kind of start to what's the word, they start to manifest it themselves, but well, there's another turn of phrase I'm looking for. Anyway, same difference though. The terrible menace of hell, that bewitchment of humanity during so many centuries, has created more nightmares, more nameless diseases, more furious madness than all vices and all excesses combined. This is what Hermetic artists of the Middle Ages represented by the incredible and unheard of monsters which they carved about the doorways of basilicas. But bewitchment by threat produces an effect altogether contrary to the intentions of the operator when it is evidently a vain intimidation, when it does outrage to the legitimate pride of the menaced person and consequently provokes his resistance, or finally, when it is ridiculous by its atrocity. The sectaries of hell have discredited heaven. Say to a reasonable man that equilibrium is the law of motion and life, that liberty, which is moral equilibrium, rests upon an eternal and immutable distinction between true and false, between good and bad. Tell him that, endowed as he is with free will, he must place himself by his works in the empire of truth and goodness, or slide back eternally like the rock of Sisyphus into the chaos of falsehood and evil. Then he will understand the doctrine, and if you term truth and goodness heaven, falsehood and evil hell, he will believe in your heaven and hell, over which the divine ideal rests calm, perfect, and inaccessible to either wrath or offense, because he will understand that if in principle hell be eternal as liberty, it cannot, in fact, be more than a temporary agony for souls, because it is an expiation. And the idea of expiation necessarily supposes that of reparation and destruction of evil. This said, that was a long sentence. This said, not with dogmatic intention, which is outside our province, but to indicate the moral and reasonable remedy for the bewitchment of consciences by terrors of the life beyond. Let us speak of the means of escaping the baleful influences of human wrath. The first among all is to be reasonable and just, giving no opportunity or excuse to anger. Josue Yara, what's up? Welcome in. I hope you're having a good day. He says, what are? What do you mean by what are, Josue? A legitimate indignation is greatly to be feared. Make haste, therefore, to acknowledge and expiate your faults. Should anger persist after that, then it certainly proceeds from vice. Seek to know what vice and unite yourself strongly to the magnetic currents of the opposite virtue. The bewitchment will have no further power upon you. Wash carefully the clothes which you have finished with before giving them away. Otherwise, burn them. Never use a garment which has belonged to an unknown person without purifying it by water, sulfur, and such aromatics as camphor, incense, amber, etc. A potent means of resisting bewitchment is not to fear it. It acts after the manner of contagious maladies. So, see it, and that's also like some of those people out there who will go have some type of viral influence on social media calling out all the magic people and the witchcraft people and being like, well, if you're it is about, like the person said earlier, Dean Master, shout out to you, said magic, there is no such thing as magic. So like that's what those people's approach, and they say, go ahead then, curse me and do this and that if you're such a big bad witch or magician or whatever. And from all external appearances, yeah, it doesn't really seem like much is going on with those people. Like they're like if and especially if they're getting who knows how many different baneful types of magics thrown their way, but then they're still just going along fine. But clearly they've got a pretty strong will and a strong belief that it's not real, therefore there's no reason to fear it, like what was just said here in the book. In times of epidemic, the terror struck are the first to be attacked. So think about like in COVID too, right? What we just went through, which is up for debate whether or not that was an epidemic or not, but still it was a widespread illness that probably infected the minds of people, and then quickly to follow after would have been their bodies in some shape or form, whether they got the disease, the sickness in a light manner, or whether they ended up perishing from it. May peace be upon them. The secret of not fearing an evil is not to think about it. And my advice is completely disinterested, since I give it in a work on magic of which I am the author. When I urge upon persons who are nervous, feeble, credulous, hysterical, superstitious devotees, foolish, without energy and without will, never to open a book on magic, to close this one if they have opened it, to turn a deaf ear to those who talk of the occult sciences, to deride them, never to believe in them, or to drink water, as said the great Pantagruelist magician, the excellent cure of Meudon. As for the wise, and it is time that we turn to them after making an allowance for the foolish, they have scarcely any sorceries to fear save those of fortune. But seeing that they are priests and physicians, they may be called upon to cure the bewitched, and this should be their method of procedure. They must persuade such a person to do some act of goodness to his tormentor, render him some service which he cannot refuse, and lead him directly or otherwise to the communion of salt. A person who believes himself bewitched by the execration and interment of the toad must carry about him a living toad in a horn box. For the bewitchments of the pierced heart, the afflicted individual must be made to eat a lamb's heart seasoned with sage and onion, and to carry a talisman of Venus or of the moon in a satchel filled with camphor and salt. For bewitchment by the waxen figure, a more perfect figure must be made and set about as far as possible with things belonging to the person. 7 talismans must be hung around the neck. It must be placed in the middle of a great pantacle representing the pentagram. And each day must be rubbed slightly with a mixture of oil and balm after reciting the conjuration of the 4 to turn aside the influence of elementary spirits. At the end of 7 days, the image must be burnt in consecrated fire, and one may rest assured that the figure fabricated by that sorcerer will at such moment lose all its virtue. We have mentioned already the sympathetic medicine of Paracelsus, who medicated waxen limbs and operated upon discharges of blood from wounds for the cure of wounds themselves. So that one is a trip to think about too. Paracelsus, he would have these waxen limbs. So say you like broke your arm or something, he'd make a wax arm, or you got I don't know, a really nasty cut or something. He wouldn't operate on the arm or on the wound, but on the waxen figure of the arm or on the blood from the wound. And it was already said in this book too, as well as you can find other information on Paracelsus, that a lot of times this would be at a distance too. So somebody would maybe travel and for their family member or something, and would bring whatever item Paracelsus would say, and then he would do his type of healing and magic on it, and end up curing or fixing, remedying whatever they had going on. This system permitted the employment of more than usually violent remedies, and the chief specifics were sublimate and vitriol. We believe that homeopathy is a reminiscence of the theories of Paracelsus and a return to his wise practices. But we shall follow up this subject in a special treatise consecrated to occult medicine. And Waite has a note that says Éliphas Lévi published several further works and left a mass of manuscripts behind him, but the treatise specified above is not numbered among them. Contracts by parents forestalling the future of their children are bewitchments which cannot be condemned too strongly. Children dedicated in white, for example, scarcely ever prosper. Those who were formerly devoted to celibacy fell commonly into debauch or ended in despair and madness. Man is not permitted to do violence to destiny, still less to impose bonds upon the lawful use of liberty. As a supplement or appendix to this chapter, we will add a few words about mandragores and androids, which several writers on magic confound with waxen images serving the purposes of bewitchment. The natural mandragore is a flamencious root, which presents more or less as a whole either the figure of a man or that of the viral members. It is slightly narcotic and has an aphrodisiacal virtue, an aphrodisiacal virtue was ascribed to it by the ancients, who represented it as being sought by Thessalian sorcerers for the composition of philters. Is this root the umbilical vestige of our terrestrial origin, as a certain magical mysticism has suggested? We dare not affirm it seriously, but it is true all the same that man issued from the slime of the earth, and his first appearance must have been in the form of a rough sketch. The analogies of nature compel us to admit the notion, at least as a possibility. The first men were, in this case, a family of gigantic, sensitive mandragores animated by the sun who rooted themselves up from the earth. Such an assumption not only does not exclude, but on the contrary, positively supposes creative will and the providential cooperation of a first cause which we have reason to call God. Some alchemists, impressed by this idea, indulged in reveries on the culture of the mandragore and experimented in the artificial reproduction of a soil sufficiently fruitful and a sun sufficiently active to humanize the said root, and thus create man without the concurrence of the female. Others, who regarded humanity as the synthesis of animals, despaired about vitalizing the mandragore, but they crossed monstrous pairs and projected human seed into animal earth, only for the production of shameful crimes and barren deformities. The third method of making the android was by galvanic machinery. One of these almost intelligent automata was attributed to Albertus Magnus, and it is said that St. Thomas destroyed it with one blow from a stick because he was perplexed by its answers. This story is an allegory. The android was primitive scholasticism, which was broken by the Summa of St. Thomas, that daring innovator who first substituted the absolute law of reason for arbitrary divinity, by formulating an axiom which we cannot repeat too often since it comes from such a master. A thing is not just because God wills it, but God wills it because it is just. The real and serious android of the ancients was a secret which they have kept hidden from all eyes, and Mesmer was the first who dared to divulge it. It was the projection of the will of the Magus into another body, organized and served by an elementary spirit. In more modern and intelligible terms, it was a magnetic subject. And then Waite has a note saying, a magnetic subject in the experiments of Mesmer was not a subject possessed by an elementary spirit, and the form in which Lévi expresses his notion is little short of nonsense. If he means to affirm that elementary spirits took possession of magnetized subjects in operations of old magic, the challenge against him would be to produce his evidence. There is none in the known records. And that does it. That does it for our Tuesday Transcendental Magic study on bewitchments. Ho ho ho. Not bad at all. Oh, you know what? I was like, I swear he said something about the Tower card, but it was actually in the next chapter, the one on astrology that we'll hop into tomorrow. So, that does it for today. And I hope you enjoyed it. Some interesting thoughts, no doubt, on the way bewitchments work and on the way to counter them. So, if you are somebody who considers yourself a magician of some shape or form, and you also may be under the impression that somebody has done some type of a bewitchment, a baneful working on you, well, you may now have some ideas as to how to undo that type of magic. Or I guess if you're somebody who really feels that you want to do bewitchments on someone, well, he also gave some examples of that. But he also gave some examples of why not to do that. So tomorrow, yep, we'll be on to the chapter on astrology. That ought to be pretty fun. We'll still probably do our 3 days of each this week, even though I took yesterday off. We'll just go ahead and still, most likely, still get into it like usual. So I thank you all for your presence. Josue Yara, great to see you again. Once Your Goddess, great to see you again. And Mary Galloway, I appreciate you stopping by and subscribing to the channel. And Dean Master, I hope you have a great day, and thank you for stopping by. Everybody else who catches it on the replay, well, I appreciate you equally as much. Much love and many blessings to you all. This has been Jay Balvale, and this has been Éliphas Lévi's Transcendental Magic, its Doctrine and Ritual. Until the next class,